The day I realized my daughter-in-law had thrown away my entire life, it wasn't because she screamed or slammed a door. It was because my closet shelf was empty. The shoebox, scuffed brown cardboard, corners soft as old bread, was gone. And when I asked where it was, she smiled and said, "Oh, that old thing. I tossed it. It was just clutter. Hi, my dear ones. I'm glad you're here." When someone throws away decades of your life and calls it clutter, that hits deep. Tell me, what would you have done in that moment? Stayed silent? Or finally spoken up? I'm 65 years old, not 90. I still drive. I still balance my own checkbook with a proper fountain pen, not some flimsy digital app. And that shoebox wasn't just clutter. It held every birthday card I had ever received since I turned 23. My late husband Daniel's looping handwriting. My son Mark's crooked, backward letters when he was 5. Even the first glitter-covered card my granddaughter ever signed, pressing so hard she nearly tore through the paper. I kept them in that box because paper remembers what people forget. That afternoon, I had only been gone for 2 hours, a routine cardiology appointment. I came home, set my purse down on the hall console, an old mahogany piece Daniel refinished himself, and walked straight to the bedroom closet. I don't know why. Maybe instinct. Maybe I just wanted to touch something that was mine. The top shelf was bare, except for a folded blanket. No shoebox. I stood there longer than I care to admit. At my age, when something isn't where you left it, the first thought is never betrayal. It's doubt. Did I move it? Did I finally misplace something important? That tiny seed of self-questioning is dangerous. People plant entire gardens in it. I walked into the kitchen where Tessa was slicing avocados with that ceramic knife she insists is imported. She didn't look up at first. "Have you seen my shoebox from the closet?" I asked. She shrugged. "Which one?" "The one with my birthday cards." "Oh." She wiped the blade on a paper towel. "That old dusty thing? I tossed it. I've been trying to declutter the house. It was honestly just taking up space." Just taking up space. The words were soft. Casual, like she'd thrown out expired yogurt. I felt something in my chest. Not pain, not yet, but a tightening. "You threw it away?" I asked carefully. "Well, yes. Nora, you don't need stacks of old paper from the 70s. We're trying to keep things minimalist. It's healthier." Minimalist. Healthier. She spoke to me like I was a confused tenant in her home. This is my house. I paid the down payment when Mark and Tessa couldn't qualify for the mortgage alone. I signed papers at a heavy oak desk under a brass banker's lamp, trusting my son when he said, "It's just easier if we all share the space for now, Mom." For now turned into 4 years. "Where did you put it?" I asked. "In the trash. The pickup was this morning." She said it without flinching. Mark walked in just then, adjusting his tie, sensing tension the way men do when they'd prefer not to choose sides. "What's going on?" "Your mother's upset about some old box I cleaned out," Tessa said quickly. I didn't realize it was such a big deal. Old box. I looked at my son. He avoided my eyes for a second too long. "Mom," he said gently, "if it was important, you should have said something." I should have said something. For 40 years, I saved those cards. For 4 years, I bit my tongue in my own kitchen. For months, I pretended not to notice how Tessa rearranged my cabinets, donated my china without asking, replaced my lace curtains with something gray and sterile that looked like it belonged in a dental clinic. And now, she had thrown away Daniel's last birthday message to me. I walked past them without another word. Calm. So calm it frightened even me. Outside, the garbage bin stood at the curb, lid open, empty. The truck had already come. I stared at that hollow plastic container like it was a grave. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I felt awake. I didn't cry. That surprised me most. Instead, I went back inside, walked straight past Tessa's lemon-scented disinfectant and Mark's uncomfortable silence, and into the laundry room. I opened the large black trash bag we kept for overflow. Empty. Then I checked the smaller bin under the sink. Nothing but coffee grounds and eggshells. I moved methodically, like I was looking for a misplaced receipt. Not 42 years of birthdays. "Tessa," I called, keeping my tone level. "Did you empty every trash can?" She appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "Of course. The truck came early. Why?" "Because sometimes they miss a bag." "They didn't miss it," she said quickly. Too quickly. Mark hovered behind her. "Mom, it's just paper. If it means that much, we can buy you a scrapbook. Start fresh." Start fresh. As if memories were houseplants you could repot. I walked to the back door and stepped outside again, scanning the curb, the neighbor's yard, the gutter. A ridiculous hope that maybe the lid hadn't closed properly and something had slipped out. The wind was still. Nothing moved. When I came back in, I went straight to my bedroom. Not to mourn, to check. My closet shelf had been wiped clean. Not just the shoebox gone. The thin layer of dust it used to sit in had been disturbed in a wide circle. The blanket folded differently than I left it, and the small cedar sachet I kept tucked in the corner was missing. I noticed things. People forget that about women my age. I opened my dresser drawer where I kept important papers in a neat file organizer, an old accordion folder with brass tabs. It looked intact. I flipped through it anyway. Insurance, property tax receipts, my marriage certificate, Daniel's death certificate. Everything seemed in place. Seemed. At dinner that night, Tessa cooked quinoa stuffed peppers in those heavy cast-iron cocottes she likes to display on open shelving. She acted cheerful, overly so. Mark talked about a project at work, avoiding any reference to the morning. Halfway through the meal, Tessa said, "I'm just trying to make the house feel lighter. Sometimes holding on to old things keeps us stuck." I set my fork down gently. "Memories don't keep you stuck," I said. "People do." The air shifted. Mark cleared his throat. "Can we not turn this into something bigger than it is?" Bigger than it is. I studied my son's face. He looked tired, but not confused, not shocked. Not protective. Complicit is a quiet word. It doesn't shout. It just sits there and waits for you to admit it fits. After dinner, I went to my desk in the corner of the living room. An old escritoire Daniel found at an estate sale. I opened the small drawer where I kept my bank statements. I don't do everything online. I like paper. Paper leaves a trail. As I sorted through the envelopes, something caught my eye. A notice from the bank about an attempted account verification earlier that week. I hadn't done that. I read it again. Then again. It could have been a mistake, a glitch, a phishing attempt, or it could have been someone testing a door. I folded the letter neatly and slipped it back into the stack. Not panic. Not yet. Across the room, Tessa laughed at something on her phone. A bright, sharp sound. Mark sat beside her, scrolling. They looked comfortable, settled. Like this house was a finished arrangement. I realized something then. The shoebox wasn't an accident. It was a test, and I had just failed it by staying quiet. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, turning slow circles above me. I thought about Daniel's last birthday card. He had written, "No matter what happens, Nora, don't let anyone shrink you." I had let them rearrange my kitchen, donate my china, replace my curtains. I had convinced myself it was compromise. That keeping peace meant keeping love. But throwing away those cards wasn't decluttering, it was erasing. And I have never been easy to erase. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of anger. Anger is hot and loud. What kept me awake was something colder. Calculation. At 65, you learn that people rarely show you their true intentions in one grand gesture. They reveal them in patterns, in what they move, in what they remove. The shoebox had always sat on the top left shelf of my closet. Right beside it, slightly behind, was a slim leather document sleeve Daniel bought years ago. Dark green, soft as butter. I hadn't opened it in months. That thought arrived slowly, too slowly. The next morning, I waited until Mark left for work and Tessa drove my granddaughter to school. The house went quiet, the kind of quiet that feels borrowed. I walked straight to my closet and reached for the leather sleeve. It was there, but lighter. I took it down carefully and opened it on the bed. Inside were copies of our property deed, Daniel's small investment certificates from the early 80s, and an old envelope addressed in his handwriting. The envelope had always contained 3 original stock certificates he bought before Mark was born. Nothing extravagant back then. But Daniel was patient. Patient men build quiet fortunes. The envelope was gone. I didn't panic. I counted everything else. Papers were slightly misaligned. The brass clasp on the sleeve had faint scratches it didn't have before. Someone had opened it. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded. So the shoebox wasn't just sentimental collateral damage. It had been camouflage. If you wanted to search that shelf without drawing attention, you'd remove the most noticeable item first, the emotional one. Then if I protested, I'd look dramatic over old cards, not documents. I let out a slow breath. I had contributed nearly $80,000 toward this house when Mark and Tessa couldn't qualify. I never demanded my name on the deed because I trusted my son. "We're family," he'd said. I had believed that was protection enough. I walked to my desk and opened my bank binder again. I flipped through the last 3 months carefully. There it was, a small verification request on my brokerage account 2 weeks ago. Not completed, just initiated. Testing doors. I picked up my old Mont Blanc pen, Daniel's anniversary gift, and began writing down dates. Garbage pickup, bank notice. The afternoon, Tessa insisted on deep cleaning my bedroom while I was at book club. I remember because she'd asked where I kept my donation boxes. She had asked. The pieces were not dramatic. They were precise. Around noon, Tessa came back. I heard her keys drop into the ceramic bowl by the door. "Nora? You home?" "In the living room," I answered evenly. She walked in, smiling. "I was thinking, maybe this weekend we could redo your closet properly. It'll feel so much better once it's simplified." Simplified. I looked at her carefully. Her hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. She wore that delicate gold bracelet Mark gave her last Christmas. Her face was open, pleasant, controlled. "You went through my shelf thoroughly yesterday," I said. Not a question. "Well, yes," she replied lightly. "There was a lot of dust." "And the leather sleeve?" A fraction of a pause, almost invisible. "What leather sleeve?" There it was. I stood up slowly, not to intimidate, just to remove the angle of her looking down at me from where I'd been seated. The dark green one, with a brass clasp, next to the shoebox. She frowned slightly, as if searching her memory. "I don't remember seeing anything like that. Maybe you moved it?" The seed again. Doubt. At 35, she might have outmaneuvered me with that tone. At 65, I've buried a husband, balanced budgets through recessions, and negotiated hospital bills that would make a banker sweat. I know when someone is lying to my face, but I didn't call her out. Not yet. Instead, I smiled. If you see it, let me know. She relaxed immediately. That told me everything. When she left the room, I walked to the window and watched her through the reflection as she picked up her phone and typed quickly. Not casually, rapidly. That afternoon, I made 2 calls. The first was to my bank. I scheduled an in-person appointment for the next morning. No details over the phone. The second was to Daniel's old attorney's office. He had retired, but the firm still existed. I asked for a consultation. If someone thinks you are soft, you don't argue. You let them believe it. And then you change the locks, quietly. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Not fancy, not fragile, just deliberate. Navy slacks, a cream blouse, and Daniel's old wristwatch. The one with the thin leather strap that smells faintly of cologne if you hold it close enough. I wanted to feel anchored. At breakfast, Tessa was unusually attentive. "You look nice today," she said, pouring almond milk into her coffee. "I have appointments," I replied. Mark glanced up. "Everything okay?" "Oh, yes," I said calmly. "Just organizing a few things." Organizing. That word seemed to land differently this time. I drove myself to the bank. The morning air was sharp, the kind that clears your head whether you ask it to or not. As I walked in, the glass doors reflected a woman who didn't look confused or sentimental. She looked precise. The banker, a young man with kind eyes and a too-tight tie, invited me into his office. I closed the door behind us. "I'd like to review every access point connected to my accounts," I said. "Every login, every authorized user, every attempted verification in the last 6 months." He blinked once, then nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Caldwell." It took 20 minutes. Tessa's email had been listed as a secondary recovery contact on one of my investment accounts. Added 3 weeks ago. "Was that change made in person?" I asked. He checked. "No, it was submitted online but not fully verified." Not fully verified, so she had tried. "I want that removed immediately," I said. "And I want dual authentication changed. New passwords. New recovery contacts. No one but me." "Yes, ma'am." I also revoked the small convenience transfer option I had once allowed Mark to use when he was between jobs. I hadn't touched it in 2 years, but it was still there. Open. Doors close quietly when you know where the hinges are. Before I left, I added one more instruction. Any future changes must be made in person with photo ID. No exceptions. No phone approvals. When I stepped back into the sunlight, I felt something unfamiliar. Relief, but not satisfaction. Because this wasn't over. From the bank, I drove to Daniel's old law firm. The building smelled faintly of polished wood and paper, a scent I've always trusted more than perfume. A young attorney named Mr. Hargrove met with me. Polite, attentive. "I'd like to update my will," I said, "and explore placing my assets into a trust." He nodded slowly. "Has something changed in your circumstances?" "Yes," I answered. "My clarity." We went through everything. The house contribution, the investment certificates, the fact that my name was not on the current deed, but I had documented proof of my financial input. "That gives you leverage," he said carefully. "I'm not looking for revenge," I replied. "I'm looking for protection." By the time I left his office, I had an appointment scheduled for the following week to finalize new documents. Driving home, I didn't rush. I let the engine idle a moment in the driveway before stepping out. Through the window, I saw Tessa pacing with her phone pressed to her ear. She stopped when she noticed my car. Interesting. Inside, she greeted me with forced brightness. "Productive day?" "Very," I said. Mark came home earlier than usual. His energy was tight, contained. He waited until after dinner to bring it up. "Mom," he began carefully, "did you change something at the bank today?" I set my teacup down gently. "Yes." "Why?" "Because it's my money." Tessa leaned forward. "We were just trying to help manage things so you wouldn't have to stress." "I wasn't stressed," I said evenly, "until someone tried to add themselves to my accounts." Silence. Mark looked between us. "Tessa?" She shook her head quickly. "It was just for emergencies. I thought that's what families do." "Families ask. They don't install themselves." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply held eye contact longer than comfortable. "If there's ever an emergency," I said softly, "I'll decide who helps me." Mark exhaled sharply, frustration rising. "Why are you making this such a big deal?" "Because it is one." But I didn't say that. Instead, I stood. "I'm going to bed." As I walked down the hallway, I could feel their eyes on my back. Not dismissive now, wary. For the first time since the shoebox disappeared, I wasn't reacting. I was positioning. The house was too quiet the next morning. Not peaceful quiet, listening quiet. I made my coffee the way I always do. In my old percolator, not that hissing chrome machine Tessa prefers. The low burble of it grounded me. I stood at the kitchen window watching the maple tree in the yard shed another handful of leaves. Behind me, I heard whispering. Not words, just the rhythm of two people speaking softly in the hallway. When I turned, it stopped. Interesting how volume changes when power shifts. Around 10, Tessa announced she was running errands. She dressed sharper than usual for groceries. Structured blazer, heels instead of sneakers. She didn't make eye contact when she left. The moment the door closed, I walked straight to the hallway console where she always tossed her mail. There it was. An envelope from a financial services company I didn't recognize. Addressed to her. I didn't open it. I don't need to break laws to see patterns. But the logo was familiar, brokerage related. I returned it exactly as I found it. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called the county records office. It took patience and 3 transfers before I got someone willing to check historical property filings. I gave them the address. I gave them my name. I asked if there had been any recent inquiries regarding deed adjustments or lien evaluations. A pause. "Yes, ma'am," the clerk said. "There was an online information request filed last week. No changes processed, just a records pull." "Under whose name?" I asked. "Request came through a third-party portal. I can't see the individual, only that it wasn't submitted by you. Not by me." So someone was checking what could be moved. I thanked her and hung up slowly. That afternoon, I decided to do something very simple. I went into my bedroom, removed every important document from the closet and dresser, and placed them into a small, fireproof lockbox Daniel had bought after a hurricane warning years ago. It had been sitting unused under the bed. I wiped the dust off and set a new code. Not the old anniversary date. Not Mark's birthday. Something no one could guess. When Mark came home that evening, he didn't greet me the way he usually did. He looked tense. "Mom, can we talk?" "We're talking," I said calmly. "In private." I followed him into the den. He closed the door. "Tessa feels like you don't trust her." I almost smiled. "Trust," I said, "is built on transparency. She was just trying to help you manage things. You're not getting younger." There it was. The sentence people use when they want you to shrink. "I'm 65, Mark," I said evenly. "Not incapable." He rubbed his forehead. "You're making everything harder than it needs to be." "No," I replied quietly. "I'm making it clearer." He stared at me like he was trying to recalibrate who I was. For years, I had been the accommodating one, the grandmother who adjusted her routines, who let them repaint her living room taupe, who swallowed irritation to keep holidays smooth. I convinced myself that harmony was love, but harmony without respect is just silence. Later that night, I stepped outside with a small flashlight and walked to the curb. I stood where the garbage bin had been 3 days ago. I imagined the shoebox inside a truck, crushed beneath other people's discards. And then I imagined something else. Someone opening my closet carefully, lifting that lid, flipping through cards not because they cared, but because they were searching. The shoebox had been vulnerable, but I wasn't anymore. Inside the house, I heard my phone buzz, a notification from my brokerage account. Login attempt blocked. I didn't react outwardly. I simply turned off the flashlight and walked back inside. Doors close quietly. But when someone keeps trying the handle, eventually you hear it. I didn't tell anyone about the blocked login attempt. Not Mark, not Tessa. Information is leverage. And I had spent too many years giving mine away freely. The next morning, I brewed my coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my tablet. The one Mark insisted I learn to use properly. I may prefer paper, but I'm not helpless. I logged into my brokerage account myself. Clean, secure. The attempted access had come from a device I didn't recognize. Location, local. Not another state. Not overseas. Local. I closed the screen and folded my hands. Across from me, Tessa was scrolling through her phone. Her expression was tight, lips pressed thin. Mark looked distracted, restless. "Everything okay?" I asked lightly. "Fine," Tessa replied too quickly. Mark didn't answer. Interesting. Around noon, I received a call from Mr. Hargrove's office confirming our appointment for document revisions. I made sure to take the call in the living room where my voice could carry just enough. "Yes," I said clearly. "I'd like the trust structured so distributions are controlled, not automatic, and I want medical and financial power of attorney reassigned." Silence from the hallway. Footsteps paused. After I hung up, Tessa appeared. "You're changing your will?" "Yes." "Why would you do that without discussing it with us?" There it was again, that assumption. "My will," I repeated gently, "is not a group project." Her jaw tightened. "We've built our lives assuming certain stability." "Stability built on my assets?" I asked calmly. She blinked. Mark entered mid-sentence. "What's going on now?" "Your mother is apparently restructuring everything," Tessa said, tone wounded. "Without even talking to us." Mark looked at me. "Mom?" "I'm organizing my affairs," I replied. "That's what responsible adults do." "You don't trust us," he said flatly. "Trust?" I leaned back in my chair and studied my son's face. The same face I kissed when he scraped his knee. The same eyes that once looked at me like I was the center of the world. "I trusted you enough to help buy this house," I said quietly. "I trusted you not to treat my belongings like garbage. I trusted that no one would try to access my accounts without permission." The room went still. "I didn't," Tessa started. "Don't," I interrupted softly. Not loud, not angry, just firm. For a split second, I saw something flash across her face. Fear. Mark ran a hand through his hair. "You're overreacting." "No," I said. "I'm responding." Later that afternoon, I did something else deliberate. I installed a small lock on my bedroom door. Nothing dramatic, just a brushed nickel knob with a key. I kept the spare in my purse. When Tessa noticed, she laughed nervously. "Is that really necessary?" "Yes," I said. "For what?" "For peace of mind." That evening, while they were watching television, I walked quietly to the hallway and glanced at the reflection in the dark window. I could see them behind me, close together, whispering, planning. Good. Let them plan, because tomorrow I planned too. And I was done underestimating myself. The following morning, I didn't wait for another notification, another whisper in the hallway, another accidental adjustment to my life. I put on a charcoal coat, tied a silk scarf at my neck, and drove back to the bank without announcing it to anyone. The sky was low and gray, the kind that makes everything feel closer to the ground. Inside the branch, the same young banker looked mildly surprised to see me again so soon, but he ushered me into his office without hesitation. I closed the door carefully and placed my leather folder on his desk. I want a full freeze on any digital changes for 72 hours, I said. No modifications of contact information, no password resets, no added devices. And I want printed confirmation of every attempted login this week. He studied my face for a moment, then nodded. Of course, Mrs. Caldwell. He turned his monitor slightly so I could see. 3 attempts in the last 48 hours. 2 from the same local IP address. The timestamps lined up neatly with the hours I had been in the kitchen, or gardening, or sitting across from Tessa while she smiled and asked if I needed help organizing my closet. My pulse didn't race, it steadied. I also want to remove any residual recovery emails and replace them with a secure hardware key, I added. I'll keep it with me. He blinked, impressed. That's very secure. That's the idea. We updated everything. New authentication methods. Written instructions that no one, not even family, was to be granted access without my physical presence. When he printed the confirmation, I read every line before signing. Paper remembers what people deny. As I stood to leave, he hesitated. You're doing the right thing, he said quietly. You'd be surprised how often this happens. I wasn't surprised at all. When I stepped outside, the air felt sharper than before, almost metallic. I didn't drive home immediately. Instead, I sat in the car and watched people move in and out of the bank, thinking about how many of them assumed their closest relationships were automatically safe. Trust is a beautiful thing, but it's not a security system. Back at the house, Tessa was waiting in the kitchen, not cooking, waiting. Her phone lay face down on the counter. Mark stood near the sink, arms crossed. You went back to the bank, he said. Yes. Why are you escalating this? Tessa demanded, her voice tight. We're family. Family doesn't try to add themselves to brokerage accounts, I replied calmly. Her face flushed. It was precautionary. In case something happened to you. If something happens to me, there are legal procedures, I said, none of which involve secrecy. Mark stepped forward. Mom, this is getting ridiculous. You're freezing accounts? Installing locks? Do you hear yourself? I held his gaze. I hear myself clearly for the first time in years. Silence filled the room like water rising in a basin. Tessa's composure cracked first. You think I'm trying to steal from you? She snapped. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I walked to the table and placed the printed login attempts down between us. Dates, times, locations. Ink doesn't tremble the way voices do. Mark stared at the paper, confusion shifting into something darker. Tessa? She shook her head quickly. It must be some mistake. Maybe your system glitched. The IP address traces locally, I said, within a mile radius. The air changed then. Not explosive, not dramatic, just undeniable. Tessa's eyes flicked toward the hallway where her office was. A small movement, but enough. Mark's voice dropped. Did you try to access her account? I was checking something for us, Tessa insisted. for our future. You know we've been stretched thin. There it was at last. Not denial, just justification. Our future, I repeated softly. Built on my consent or without it? She didn't answer. I gathered the papers and slid them back into my folder. This ends today, I said. No more access attempts. No more rearranging my property. No more decisions about my assets. If it happens again, I won't handle it privately. Mark looked stunned. You'd report your own family? I would protect myself, I said. There's a difference. No one raised their voice. No one stormed out. But something fundamental shifted in that room. For the first time, I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was drawing a line with ink, not tears. That evening, they kept their distance. I locked my bedroom door before sleeping and placed the small hardware authentication key inside my nightstand. I didn't feel frightened. I felt prepared. Because when someone realizes you're no longer easy to maneuver, they either retreat or they make one last move. And I had the sense that this wasn't over yet. The shift after that confrontation was subtle, but unmistakable. No slammed doors, no shouting matches. Just politeness sharpened to a blade. Tessa moved through the house like a guest who refused to unpack, and Mark avoided long conversations with me, as if too many words might trigger another line he couldn't cross back over. For 2 days, nothing happened. That was what unsettled me most. On the third evening, Mark came into my room without knocking. He didn't try the locked handle. He waited until I opened it. That alone told me he had learned something. Mom, can we talk? He asked quietly. I stepped aside and let him in. He looked older than 65 years of me had ever felt. Stress does that to people. We're struggling, he admitted. Mortgage rates adjusted. The school tuition increased. We've been juggling credit lines. I listened without interrupting. Tessa thought if we consolidated some things, temporarily, it would give us breathing room. By accessing my accounts? I asked. He flinched. She thought you wouldn't mind, eventually. It's all going to come to us anyway. There it was, the assumption laid bare. Mark, I said gently, nothing comes to you. It is given, and gifts can be withdrawn. He stared at the carpet. We never meant to hurt you. I know, I replied. And I did. Hurt wasn't the objective. Control was. Later that night, I heard raised voices in their bedroom, not loud enough to make out words, but sharp enough to cut through the wall. A drawer slammed. Footsteps paced. Then silence. The next morning, Tessa approached me with a new tone entirely. Calm. Almost apologetic. I think we started off wrong, she said. Maybe we can reset. Fresh start. Full transparency. Transparency offered only after being caught is not transparency. It's strategy. What does that look like to you? I asked. She hesitated. Maybe we sit down together, review everything, figure out a plan that works for all of us. All of us, I repeated. Yes. We're a household. No, I said softly. You're a married couple living in a house I helped secure. That's different. Her eyes hardened for just a second before she smoothed her expression again. So what are you planning, Nora? Planning. The word hung between us. I'm ensuring my independence, I replied. That afternoon, I received confirmation from Mr. Hargrove. The trust documents were drafted. All assets would be managed through it. Distributions discretionary, conditions clearly defined. No automatic inheritance triggered by convenience. I signed the preliminary paperwork the following morning. When I returned home, I noticed something small but telling. The hallway console drawer, the one where Tessa kept spare keys, was slightly open. Inside, The duplicate to my old bedroom lock was missing, except it wasn't useful anymore. I had replaced the cylinder entirely. That evening, over dinner, I spoke calmly. I've finalized new estate arrangements. Everything is secured under a trust. If anything happens to me, distribution will follow specific guidelines. Mark froze mid-bite. What guidelines? Responsible behavior, I said. Tessa's fork scraped the plate. You're punishing us. I'm protecting myself. The tension finally cracked. You think you're the victim? She snapped. You've controlled this house for years. We can't even move a picture frame without it being a statement. I met her anger without raising mine. You threw away my husband's last words to me. That was paper, she shot back. No, I said quietly. That was history. The room fell silent. For a moment, I saw uncertainty flicker in Mark's eyes. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't about a shoebox. It was about a boundary he had never believed I would draw. And once drawn, it wasn't going to be erased. 2 mornings later, I received a call I had almost stopped expecting. Mrs. Caldwell? A male voice asked. This is Aaron from the transfer station. You came by earlier this week asking about a box of greeting cards. My hand tightened around the phone. Yes. Well, we don't usually do this. But one of the sanitation workers remembered a box spilling inside a larger contractor bag. He set the bag aside before it went into compaction because he thought it looked personal. We can't promise much, but if you want to come down, you should do it today. I didn't waste time. The transfer station smelled of oil, damp cardboard, and something metallic that clung to the back of your throat. Aaron met me near a side building, away from the larger trucks. He was younger than I expected, mid-30s maybe, grease on his sleeves and kindness in his eyes. I couldn't save everything, he said quietly. But this bag never made it to the crusher. He handed me a thick plastic sack, tied loosely at the top. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside, bent but intact, was my shoebox. Crushed slightly at one corner. Smudged, but real. I didn't cry. I inhaled. Paper and dust and something faintly floral from an old sachet that must have burst inside. I opened the lid carefully. Not all the cards were there. Some envelopes were torn. Glitter had spilled everywhere like dull stardust. But Daniel's last birthday card was near the bottom, folded but legible. I pressed it to my chest for 1 second longer than dignity requires. Thank you, I told Aaron. You have no idea. He nodded once. Some things aren't trash. On the drive home, I didn't feel victorious. I felt certain. Because if the shoebox had been removed to access the leather sleeve, and if the sleeve had been opened, and if login attempts were still happening after my first warning, then this wasn't desperation. It was entitlement. When I walked into the house, Tessa was in the kitchen again. Always the kitchen. She looked up and froze when she saw the box in my arms. I thought that was gone, she said before she could stop herself. So did I replied. Mark came in seconds later, drawn by the silence. His eyes widened when he saw it. You found it? Yes. Tessa's composure slipped just slightly. I can't believe you went digging through garbage for that. I didn't, I said calmly. Someone kind made sure it wasn't destroyed. I placed the shoebox on the table and opened it deliberately. Glitter dust caught the afternoon light. Bent envelopes. Familiar handwriting. Interesting thing, I added quietly, lifting the lid fully. The envelope that used to sit beside this box is still missing. Mark looked confused. What envelope? Tessa didn't answer. The dark green leather sleeve, I continued. It was opened. Papers shifted. An envelope removed. That's ridiculous, she snapped. You're accusing me of stealing now? I'm stating facts. You have no proof. I looked at her steadily. Not yet. Mark's voice rose slightly. This is insane. Mom, you can't just imply things like that. I closed the lid gently. Then help me find it. The request hung there. If she hadn't touched it, she would have been the first to search, to offer assistance, to clear suspicion. Instead, Tessa crossed her arms. I'm done being accused in my own home. Your home. I picked up the shoebox again. It's my house, too. I walked toward my bedroom. Behind me, I heard Tessa whisper something sharp to Mark. I didn't catch the words. I didn't need to, because now the stakes had shifted. The shoebox was back. The envelope wasn't. And someone in this house was running out of time. That night, I didn't confront anyone. I didn't accuse. I didn't search their bedroom or demand explanations. Instead, I carried the shoebox into my room, locked the door behind me, and spread the cards across my bed like evidence. Some were damp at the corners. Some were permanently creased. But they were mine. I opened Daniel's last birthday card carefully, smoothing the fold with my palm. Don't let anyone shrink you, he had written in that steady blue ink. The paper was worn, but the message wasn't. I placed it aside and thought about the envelope. 3 original stock certificates, purchased in 1984. Daniel had always called them our quiet parachute. Over the decades, they had split and appreciated. Not a fortune that would make headlines, but enough to change someone's behavior if they knew about it. And Tessa knew. Not because I told her, but because she once overheard Daniel and me discussing them years ago, back when she and Mark were just dating. She had asked curious questions then. Too curious. The next morning, I made a decision that felt almost theatrical, but precision sometimes requires an audience. Mark had a small promotion dinner scheduled that week at a local restaurant. A modest celebration with 2 colleagues and their spouses. Tessa had insisted I attend to show unity. I agreed. But before that dinner, I needed confirmation. I called the brokerage firm that held the certificates, separate from my main accounts. I provided the certificate numbers from my photocopies. The representative placed me on hold briefly. When he returned, his tone had shifted. Mrs. Caldwell, there was an inquiry about transferring these shares last week. The request wasn't completed because the original physical certificates are required. My grip tightened on the phone. Who initiated the inquiry? It was submitted online. The name provided was yours. Of course it was. And the mailing address listed for documentation? He read it. It was this house. I thanked him and hung up slowly. The envelope hadn't been removed to hide it. It had been removed to use it. I sat very still for a long time. Then I did something simple. I walked into the kitchen where Tessa was arranging flowers in a tall glass vase. White lilies, dramatic, fragrant. I confirmed something today, I said evenly. She didn't look up. What's that? The stock certificates were inquired about. Transfer attempt, last week. Her hand paused mid-adjustment. I don't know what you're talking about, she replied. Original physical certificates are required, I continued calmly. Which means someone needs the envelope. She turned slowly. Are you threatening me? No, I said. I'm informing you. Mark walked in just then, catching the tail end of the tension. What now? I looked at him, not her. There was an attempt to transfer Daniel's stocks, under my name. His face went pale. That's not possible. It is, I said softly, and it failed. Tessa laughed, sharp, brittle. So now you think I forged your name? I think someone believed I wouldn't notice, I replied. Silence stretched tight between us. Then Tessa said something she shouldn't have. Well, maybe if assets were structured more fairly, people wouldn't feel the need to protect their future. Protect, not deny. Mark turned toward her slowly. Tessa. She realized it too late. Her composure fractured for half a second before she recovered. I'm done with this paranoia, she snapped and walked out of the room. Mark stood frozen. Did you know? I asked him quietly. He shook his head, but his uncertainty was louder than any confession. I didn't press further, because now I had what I needed: intent, and proof that it wasn't about a shoebox. It was about ownership. The dinner was in 2 nights, and I intended to attend. The dinner reservation was for Friday at 7. A small Italian place downtown with brick walls and soft amber lighting, intimate enough for conversation, public enough for witnesses. I spent Thursday doing something that would have looked ordinary to anyone watching. I reorganized my closet. I watered the plants. I baked a small batch of almond biscotti and left them cooling on the rack as if life were moving along its usual track. But underneath that calm, I was aligning pieces. Friday morning, I met Mr. Hargrove again. The trust documents were finalized, notarized, sealed. My assets, liquid accounts, investment certificates, even documentation of the funds I had contributed toward the house, were now structured under clear conditions. No discretionary access, no assumptions. If distributions were ever to happen, they would be tied to specific benchmarks of conduct and responsibility. I also filed a formal letter revoking any implied consent for financial representation by family members. It wasn't dramatic. It was surgical. Do you anticipate confrontation? He asked gently. I anticipate clarity, I replied. Before leaving his office, I requested certified copies of everything. Paper has weight. Weight changes posture. Back home, the atmosphere felt brittle. Mark barely looked at me. Tessa moved with a quiet intensity, her phone rarely leaving her hand. She wore a deep green dress that evening, expensive, understated, deliberate. Mark's suit jacket looked newly pressed. They were dressing for optics. So was I. I chose a navy dress I'd worn once before at Daniel's retirement dinner. Simple pearls, low heels, my hair brushed smooth. I placed the slim leather folder, now heavier with documentation, into my handbag. The restaurant hummed softly when we arrived. Warm light, clinking glasses, muted conversation. Mark's colleagues greeted us with polite enthusiasm. Introductions were made. I smiled graciously. I have always known how to host myself in public. For the first 20 minutes, everything followed the script. Small talk. Career praise. Tessa laughing lightly at appropriate intervals. Mark describing his long-term growth strategy at work. Growth. Interesting word. Halfway through the main course, one of Mark's colleagues asked how long we had all lived together. Tessa answered before anyone else could. It's been wonderful having Nora with us, she said sweetly. Multi-generational living is such a blessing. With us. I set my napkin down. I actually contributed significantly to securing the house, I said evenly, smiling as if adding charming trivia. Nearly $80,000 at closing. There was a flicker of surprise around the table. Mark cleared his throat. Mom, I'm proud of it, I continued calmly. Family support should be transparent. Tessa's smile tightened. One of the colleagues nodded politely. That's incredibly generous. Yes, I said. Generosity requires trust. The word hung heavier than the wine glasses. Tessa leaned closer to me, voice low. This isn't the place. On the contrary, I said softly, it's the perfect place. Pause for a second and imagine this. You're sitting at that table. Everyone's smiling. and you know one sentence can change everything. Would you speak up publicly or keep it private to avoid shame? Tell me honestly, what would you have done? Mark looked between us, tension finally visible. Mom, please. I reached into my handbag slowly and removed the leather folder. I didn't slam it. I didn't wave it. I simply placed it on the table beside my plate. I confirmed an attempted transfer of Daniel's stock certificates last week, I said, my voice steady and audible, but not raised. Submitted under my name, without my consent. The table went silent. Tessa inhaled sharply. This is absurd. I also confirmed login attempts on my brokerage account, local origin, after access had already been revoked. Mark's face drained of color. His colleague stared down at his plate, suddenly fascinated by pasta. I have updated my will, I continued. All assets are now secured under a trust. No distribution will occur without conditions being met. And any further unauthorized attempt to access my finances will result in legal action. The word legal shifted the air entirely. Tessa's composure fractured. You're humiliating us, she hissed. No, I replied calmly. I'm correcting the narrative. Mark's voice was barely audible. Tessa, did you... She stood abruptly. I was protecting our future. You think she doesn't hold this over us already? There it was. Not denial. Admission dressed as justification. The surrounding tables pretended not to listen, but they were listening. I folded my hands gently. My future is not communal property. Mark looked at me then, not as a son placating a mother, but as a man realizing he had misjudged the foundation beneath his own stability. I never meant for this to happen, he said quietly. I know, I answered. But it did. I closed the folder and placed it back in my handbag. After tonight, there will be no confusion. I will remain in the house under clear boundaries. My finances are sealed, and respect is no longer optional. No shouting, no tears. Just consequence. The drive home from the restaurant was silent. Not the awkward silence of people who don't know what to say. The heavier kind. The silence of consequences settling into place. Mark kept both hands on the steering wheel, jaw tight, eyes fixed ahead. Tessa stared out the passenger window, her reflection pale against the glass. I watched them both from the back seat. Neither of them realized yet that something had shifted permanently. When we walked into the house, Tessa went straight to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of wine with a hand that wasn't quite steady. Mark loosened his tie and leaned against the counter. Did you have to do that there? He asked me quietly. Yes, I replied. You blindsided us. No, I said calmly. I gave you multiple chances to address it privately. Tessa turned sharply. You embarrassed us in front of his colleagues. I stated facts, I said. You implied I'm a criminal. I implied nothing, I answered evenly. The brokerage confirmed the inquiry. She set the glass down harder than necessary. You're enjoying this? That accusation surprised me. Enjoying what? I asked. Watching us panic. Holding power over us. Power. For years I had mistaken silence for humility. Tonight, they mistook firmness for dominance. I don't enjoy conflict, I said quietly. I enjoy safety. Mark ran his hands over his face. So what happens now? Now. It was a fair question. I remain in this house under clear boundaries, I said. My finances are sealed. My legal documents are secured, and any further attempt to access my assets, directly or indirectly, will be documented formally. Tessa let out a humorless laugh. You're threatening your own family. I'm defining consequences, I corrected. The room felt smaller. After a moment, Mark spoke again. softer this time. Did you really change everything? Yes. To what? To a structure that protects me. He nodded slowly, absorbing it. Something in him was recalculating, not out of greed, but out of fear. Fear that the foundation he had leaned on without thinking might not hold him the way he assumed. Tessa stepped closer to him. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "I'll give you space," I replied. I walked down the hallway and locked my bedroom door behind me. Inside, the air felt different. Not lighter, not celebratory. Just steady. I took the shoebox from the closet and placed it on the bed again. I hadn't had time to go through all the cards yet. I opened it slowly and ran my fingers over the uneven stack. Some envelopes were missing entirely. That detail hadn't left my mind. If the envelope with the stock certificates had been removed for a transfer attempt, then where was it now? It hadn't been returned. And if Tessa believed she could still leverage it, she wouldn't destroy it, which meant it was somewhere in this house. Hidden. The thought didn't frighten me. It clarified my next move. I took out my phone and scheduled one more meeting with Mr. Hargrove for Monday. This time, not about the trust, about documentation of attempted financial fraud, not a police report. Not yet, but a written legal record, time-stamped. Because the moment someone realizes their strategy failed publicly, they either retreat or they double down privately. And I intended to be ready for either. Down the hallway, voices rose again, low, urgent, not shouting, but strained. I couldn't hear words. I didn't need to. The illusion of control had fractured tonight. Now they knew I wasn't unaware, and I knew they were capable. I placed Daniel's last birthday card back into the shoebox carefully and closed the lid. This wasn't over. But for the first time since that empty shelf, I felt something solid beneath my feet. Not anger. Authority. Saturday morning arrived too quietly. No confrontation, no apology, no dramatic exit. Tessa behaved as though nothing had happened. She made breakfast. She asked Mark if he wanted coffee. She even knocked, lightly, on my bedroom door before entering the hallway. It was a performance. But performances require energy, and I could see hers thinning. I spent the morning in the living room reviewing copies of my trust documents again. Not because I doubted them, but because repetition strengthens resolve. Around noon, my granddaughter Lily padded into the room holding her tablet. "Grandma?" she asked softly. "Yes, sweetheart." She hesitated. "Are you mad at Mom?" Children sense tectonic shifts before adults admit them. "I'm not mad at you," I said gently. "That's not what I asked." Smart girl. I smiled faintly. "I'm disappointed in some choices." She sat beside me, quiet for a moment. Then, "I saw Mom in your closet last week." The air didn't change on the surface, but inside, everything aligned. "She told me not to tell," Lily added quickly. "She said she was organizing, but she was looking in the green folder. I thought maybe she was helping." I placed my hand over hers. "Thank you for telling me." Children don't understand leverage. They understand fairness. That afternoon, while Mark took Lily to a birthday party, Tessa left the house alone. No explanation. No errand announcement. Just keys, door, silence. I didn't search her things. Instead, I walked calmly into the small home office she used near the back of the house. The door was slightly open. On her desk sat a sleek black filing tray. Nothing unusual, except one thing. A thin manila envelope tucked halfway beneath a stack of printed financial articles. My pulse didn't spike. It steadied. I stepped closer and slid the envelope free. No address written on the outside, but I knew the weight. I opened it slowly. Inside were Daniel's original stock certificates, intact, unsigned, untouched, not yet transferred. She had kept them, not destroyed, not returned. Kept. I slid them back into the envelope and stood very still. This was the point where anger could take over, where confrontation could explode, where accusations could escalate beyond repair. Instead, I did something far quieter. I walked back to my bedroom, retrieved the leather sleeve, and placed the certificates inside it again. Then I locked them in my fireproof box. When Mark and Lily returned, I asked them both to sit in the living room. Tessa entered a minute later, sensing something. I didn't raise my voice. "I found the missing certificates," I said calmly. Mark looked startled. "Where?" "In the home office." Tessa froze. "You went through my things?" she demanded. "I retrieved what was mine," I replied evenly. Her composure finally cracked completely. "You had no right." "No right?" I repeated quietly. "To my late husband's property?" Mark looked at her slowly. "Tessa, tell me you didn't." She opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. "I was trying to protect us," she said finally, voice trembling. "If something happened to her, we'd be secure. She's changing everything. She doesn't trust us. Because you tried to move assets without consent," I said. "I didn't finish it." "You started it." Silence swallowed the room. Mark sank back into his chair as if something inside him had given way. "Why would you do this without telling me?" "Because you would have stopped me," she whispered. There it was, intent, secrecy, action. No misunderstanding left. I looked at them both carefully. "I am not pressing charges," I said calmly. "Not today." Relief flickered across Tessa's face too quickly. "But this changes everything," I continued. "You will not access my finances. You will not handle my documents. And if there is even one more attempt, formal action follows." Mark nodded slowly. He couldn't look at me. Tessa's anger drained into something else. Fear. Because now there was no ambiguity left. No gray area. No miscommunication. She had been caught with proof in her own office, and I had chosen restraint, which is far more powerful than revenge. After the certificates were back in my possession, the house felt different, not calmer, just exposed, like the walls had absorbed too much truth to pretend anymore. Tessa avoided me entirely that evening. No sharp comments, no defensive speeches, just distance. Mark, on the other hand, lingered in the doorway of my bedroom before knocking softly. "Mom," he said, stepping inside. "I didn't know." "I believe you," I answered. He exhaled shakily and sat down. "She told me she was just reviewing things. I thought it was about budgeting. I never imagined she'd try to transfer anything." "You didn't imagine it," I said gently, "because you didn't want to." That landed. He looked older than he had a week ago. The comfort of assumption had been stripped away. "I messed up," he said quietly. "You allowed it," I corrected, not cruelly. "There's a difference, but both matter." He nodded, eyes glassy. "What happens now?" That question again. "Now," I said, "you decide what kind of man you want to be." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't demand that he choose between us. I simply made it clear that silence had a cost. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Tessa came to me first. Not defensive, not furious, measured. "I shouldn't have done it," she said flatly. I thought if the certificates were moved into an account we could manage, it would simplify things. Simplify, I repeated quietly. We're drowning, she admitted. You don't see the bills, the pressure. I panicked. And your panic justified taking something that wasn't yours? I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she said something that told me more than any apology could. You were always going to control everything anyway. Control. For years, I had given them freedom inside my own home. Freedom to redecorate, to restructure routines, to adjust shared expenses. I mistook accommodation for harmony. Now that I had drawn boundaries, it looked like control to someone who had grown comfortable without them. I never controlled you, I said calmly. I simply didn't stop you. That silence was heavy. By Sunday afternoon, Mark had made a decision of his own. He sat Tessa down at the dining table while I remained in the room, not hidden, not distant. I can't build a future on deception, he said quietly to her. If we're struggling, we face it. We don't steal from my mother. The word steal hung there. Tessa's shoulders stiffened. I didn't steal. You tried, he replied. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, she stood up, walked to the hallway, and returned with a small overnight bag. I need space, she said. Mark didn't stop her. The front door closed softly behind her. Not slammed, not dramatic, just final for the moment. Mark stood in the living room for several seconds after she left, as if expecting the house to collapse without her presence. It didn't. He turned to me. I don't know what happens next. That depends on you, I said. He nodded slowly. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without locking my bedroom door. Not because I trusted blindly again, but because the threat had been named. And once named, it loses its shadow. The shoebox sat safely back in my closet, the certificates locked away, the trust sealed. The house was quieter now, but it wasn't fragile anymore. The house did not fall apart after Tessa left. That surprised Mark more than it surprised me. Monday morning came with ordinary light pouring through the kitchen windows. I made coffee in my percolator. Mark sat across from me, quieter than I had ever seen him. No defensiveness, no quick justifications, just a man finally aware of the weight of his choices. She's staying with her sister, he said. I assumed, I replied. He looked at me for a long moment. I should have protected you. The words were simple, not dramatic, but real. You should have listened, I corrected gently. He nodded. No argument this time. Over the next few days, something steady replaced the chaos. Mark met with a financial advisor of his own, not to access my accounts, to review his debt, his spending, his reality. It wasn't comfortable. But growth rarely is. Tessa called once. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, measured, careful, almost rehearsed. She said she wanted to rebuild trust. She didn't mention the certificates. She didn't mention the transfer attempt. Interesting what people choose not to say. I didn't block her number. I simply didn't rush to respond. By Friday, Mark came into the living room holding a folder of his own. I'm refinancing my portion of the mortgage without your contribution attached, he said. I want it documented clearly that what you gave was a loan unless you decide otherwise. Unless I decide otherwise. That was new. I appreciate that, I said. We sat together in silence for a while after that. Not awkward, not tense. Just honest. The shoebox remained on the top shelf of my closet, but now it sat inside a clear protective case I had ordered online, not because I feared it would be thrown away again, but because some things deserve visible protection. On Sunday afternoon, Lily came over with Mark. She ran into my room and hugged me tightly. "Mom says you're mad," she whispered. "I'm careful," I replied softly. That seemed to satisfy her. Later that evening, Mark asked if I thought there was any path forward with Tessa. "There's always a path," I said, "but not without accountability." He nodded slowly. He understood now that forgiveness is not the same as restoration. Weeks passed. Tessa returned eventually, not with entitlement, not with excuses, but with something closer to humility. She apologized properly this time, not for being caught, for attempting it at all. I listened. I did not rush to embrace. Trust is rebuilt in increments, not declarations. My trust remained conditional. My boundaries remained intact. And my legal protections remained exactly as they were. As for me, I'm 65 years old. I still drive. I still balance my accounts. And my husband's last words to me are exactly where they belong. Safe. And so am I. Stories like this aren't really about money. They're about boundaries. About the moment you decide you will not be reduced in your own life. If this meant something to you, write "I won't shrink" in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories like this.